I know, me too.
So there's two golden goats. That one. And that one. Oh, that's a lot house. I'm sure it's a lot house. So that there is the lighthouse. How small it is. In front of the friggin' jail. No one in here. See if we can find it. Anybody in here? This is It's been Dunny. It bounces too. Oop. Famous ALCATRAZ.
Those bars could easily be sawed through the hacksaw. And in this building where inmates were working in the carpentry shop, the blacksmith shop, they were working in the rubber mat shop, inmates had access to tools. Now they were watched carefully by the guards, and the tools were always ensured that they were returned. They had to walk through metal detectors on their way back up to the prison every day. But when they were behind the walls of their factory shop, they had access to lots of sharp things. And these guys realized that as they worked in the rubber mat shop, in the very back of the building, that they weren't always being watched carefully by the guards, that they could get a hold of a tool and they could start sawing away at the bars. They realized pretty quickly that they could saw through these bars pretty well. They could work at them for a while. They couldn't do it all at once. They had to fill the hole that they were working at with shoe polish in between the sessions. But over time, they got plenty of opportunities to work away at this bar until one day, finally, the bar snaps. They have their route out of the workspace. But they have a problem, and they know that as soon as they make it out of that building, the guard on the roof of the building will notice them as they try to break free and run down the cliffs and jump into the water. They'll probably get shot by that guard. And though these guys don't have a lot to lose, they don't want to get shot by one of the prison guards. So they wait. They seal the bar that they have broken right back into place and they go back to their lives at Alcatraz, day after monotonous day, to the cell house, to meals, back to their jobs, back to the cell house, back to the jobs, back to the cell house, until one morning when it's time for them to go to their jobs, they're told that they're not going to go to work that day. After breakfast, they're sent back to their cells, all of the inmates are, because it's too foggy. So foggy that the guards are worried about escorting the inmates down to the Industries building, worried that someone could break away and slip away into that dense fog. And so they wait in their cells for the morning. By lunchtime, the fog is lifted just a little bit, but just enough that the guards agree to send the inmates to work for the afternoon. Ralph Rowe and Ted Cole know this is their afternoon to go. The fog's still pretty thick. They make it down to the Industries building, they break that bar out, they climb through the window. They've taken a wrench with them to break one of the fences open. They slip down into the water on some of those rubber discarded tires that were from the mat shop. And then they start to swim away from Alcatraz. And they're never seen again. That's the last of them. No one witnessed their escape. The guard on the guard tower didn't see them. The guard in the model shop never saw them. The only person who claims to have seen them on their swim away from Alcatraz is one inmate who said he saw one of the guys fighting against the current before his head slipped away into the fog. There's very little evidence after their escape. FBI followed every shred of evidence they could have, every rumor that these guys had escaped down to South America and were living lives of luxury down there, every rumor that they'd been spotted in San Francisco. These guys were never found. News stories like to sensationalize their escape that had shown that 3 years after it opened, Alcatraz was already quite possibly not actually escape-proof. But no one could figure out, were they out there alive or had they drowned in the bay? No bodies were found, no evidence. Years went by, many, many years in fact. It wasn't until the 1970s the FBI finally closed the case, because at that point these guys were 100 years old and it was assumed that they'd be dead in any case. And the FBI officially said that they believed that these guys had drowned in the San Francisco Bay. The day that they escaped, it was December, the water was cold, but more importantly, the time that they escaped, the current was going very swiftly out to sea. So it was believed they'd been swept away, and there's no way they could have made it. They did a pretty good job of it, because over the decades that followed, pretty much all the attempts at escaping didn't end well for the inmates. They were recaptured, thrown back in their cells. They were shot by a guard during their attempts. They made it into the bay, but a body was found. They were found to have drowned. So all different routes to try to make it out of the prison, none of which were successful. And yet, the years would go by, and it wouldn't be all good for Alcatraz. So it took all the way until 1962 before the next big breakout would occur. This is the one you might have heard of. So this is the one about these three guys. How many of you have seen the movie Escape from Alcatraz? Quite a few of you. For those of you who have not, it's a fun one to watch after your visit to Alcatraz, because it's a good movie, but also it was filmed here on the island, so it will look familiar. Finally, it is based on a true story, and though it is no documentary, it definitely takes its Hollywood liberties. It is the closest to accurate of any of the Alcatraz movies. Those of you who have seen the movie or know a little bit about this escape will say there was a fourth guy. His name was Alan West. I'm not going to talk about him a whole lot today because, well, he didn't do what these other three guys did. So these three men, we'll start with this guy on the left. His name is Frank Morris. Frank Morris got sent to Alcatraz because he was considered an escape risk. No surprise, his last prison years had been spent in Louisiana. So he arrives at Alcatraz. Frank Morris gets sent up to have his prisoner ID card filled out. They take his photo, assign him a number, they fill out all the information about him. Under occupation, the only thing that was listed was an escape artist. So this escape artist arrives at Alcatraz, and he meets these two guys, John and Clarence Anglin. These two are brothers. They were partners in crime during their freedom, and in prison they had been partners in escape attempts. So they too had repeatedly tried to escape together from other prison facilities. Their most recent escape before they got sent to Alcatraz was when one brother tried to sneak the other out of prison by stacking him in between a bunch of bread boxes on a cart being shipped out of the prison. It didn't work, but it got him sent to Alcatraz with explicit instructions attached to these two when they arrived. Don't let them have their cells together, the warden was urged. And he did heed this advice, but only a little bit. He let them have their cells just a few cells apart from one another, which was not close enough for them necessarily to talk to each other as neighbors, but all the inmates never took any of the utensils. However, these guys figured out a way where they probably stacked one spoon on top of each other and took them both at once, made it look like they were taking one spoon so that they could return one spoon and pocket the other. It would later be found that they managed to get about a dozen spoons from the Alcatraz dining hall, while only one was ever noticed missing. And what they did with each of these spoons is they'd break off the top of the spoon handles, start pecking away at that concrete. Or not by making a couple of these dummy heads. So these guys crafted these heads and meticulously painted them. They stole real human hair from the Alcatraz barber shop. They created these heads. They tucked them into their beds, set them on their pillows, and then crawled out through the back of their cells, climbed up that utility corridor, up to their workshop. While these heads were sleeping in their beds, they were up above the Alcatraz cells, working on their rubber raft. Now, how do you build a rubber raft in prison? Well, one of the guys was pretty clever. He'd been checking out issues of Popular Mechanics magazine from the Alcatraz library. Some of those magazines had some pretty useful instructions on how to build life jackets. One of them, even better, had an article on how to galvanize rubber. They think this because after these three men disappeared, there were a few things that came together. So these three men made their break into the bay. Their raft, the men, all gone, disappeared. The next morning, June of 1962, three men have escaped. The spoon is mightier than the bars, and they've broken away from the escape-proof prison that's not so escape-proof once again. Floating around, showing up. It's hard to say whether they made it. The investigators went on and on with their search for these men. Couldn't figure out what had happened to them. Eventually, the FBI handed off the case to the federal marshals, and to this day, in fact, there is still a federal marshal assigned to this case. It's still open. They're still looking for these men, and there's one investigator who's on the trail searching for this man. He comes out to Alcatraz every once in a while, and he talks to the rangers out here, tells us the latest news that he's gotten.
All right.